Jake Rivers pushed open the rusted door of the garage, and the smell hit him first. Old grease, stale air, and something else, something metallic and foreign. His boots crunched through the thick layer of dust that covered everything, leaving the first footprints this place had seen in years. The garage was huge. 3 repair bays stretched out before him, each one big enough to handle ships twice the size of anything humans typically flew. Overhead cranes hung motionless from the ceiling, their chains covered in grime. Tool racks lined the walls, but most of the equipment looked alien, designed for hands that had more fingers than his or different joints altogether. Jake ran his hand along a workbench, his fingers coming away gray with dust. He'd spent 20 years in the Marines, most of that time keeping dropships and transports running in combat zones. After his discharge, he'd bounced between jobs on different stations, always working for someone else, always taking orders. This place was supposed to be different. This was supposed to be his fresh start. The 4-armed Quellan who sold it to him had practically shoved the ownership papers into his hands. The creature's multiple eyes had darted around nervously the entire time, and it had left the station on the next transport out. Jake had thought he was getting a bargain. Now he wasn't so sure. The warnings had started the moment he'd signed the papers. The dock workers had gathered around him at the loading bay, their faces serious. "You bought the cursed garage?" one of them had asked, a woman with gray hair and a prosthetic arm. "Don't believe in curses," Jake had replied. "Doesn't matter if you believe or not," another worker had chimed in. "Every ship that got serviced there during the old owner's time ended up destroyed. Every single one. People started calling it the Death Dock." Jake had shrugged it off. Superstition. The galaxy was full of it, especially on the older stations where humans mixed with dozens of alien species. Everyone had their ghost stories and bad luck tales. But now, standing in the empty garage with nothing but the hum of the station's life support systems around him, he felt a chill run down his spine. He shook it off. He had work to do. The place needed a complete overhaul before he could even think about taking customers. First step, inventory. He needed to know what equipment actually worked and what was junk. Jake made his way to the back office, a small room tucked behind the main repair floor. The door stuck, swollen in its frame from years of neglect. He put his shoulder into it and it gave way with a groan. The office was cramped and dark. Jake found a light panel on the wall and pressed it. After a moment of flickering, dim blue lights came on overhead. The desk was buried under papers, data pads, and old mechanical parts. Filing cabinets lined one wall, their drawers hanging open. Jake started sorting through the mess. Most of it was garbage, outdated catalogs, broken tools, empty food containers from species he didn't recognize. But then he found the service records. Stacks of them organized by date going back decades. He pulled out a few files at random. The first ones were in languages he couldn't read, flowing script that might have been Quellan, harsh angular symbols that looked crinoid, circular patterns that belonged to some species he'd never even met. He set those aside. Then he found files in English. His heart rate picked up. Why would an alien garage have English repair logs? He opened the first one, his hands suddenly unsteady. The ship designation made him freeze. KS Dominator. He knew that name. Every Marine knew that name. It was a crinoid Empire cruiser that had bombarded the colony on New Texas during the war. Thousands of civilians had died in that attack. Jake flipped through more files. KS Retribution. KS Iron Fist. KS Vengeance. All of them crinoid military vessels. All of them from the war years, when the Empire had pushed deep into human territory, burning colonies and taking prisoners. But it was the handwriting in the margins that made his hands start to shake. Small, precise notes in blue ink. Maintenance observations. System checks. Technical specifications. The handwriting itself was unremarkable, but the formatting, the way the information was organized, the specific abbreviations used, the method of documenting each repair, that was pure Earth military protocol. Jake had filled out thousands of maintenance reports during his service. Every Marine mechanic learned the same system, drilled into them during basic training. Date in the top right corner. Ship ID on the left. Systems checked listed in order from bow to stern. Issues marked with a red dash. Completed repairs marked with a blue check. This was that exact system. But more than that, Jake recognized the specific quirks of the handwriting. The way the letter R looped at the bottom. The way the number 7 had a line through it. The tiny star drawn next to completed jobs. This was Sergeant Bill Hayes' handwriting. Jake sat down hard in the dusty chair, the file still open in his hands. Bill Hayes. His commanding officer. His mentor. The man who'd taught him everything about keeping ships flying under impossible conditions. The man who'd supposedly died 30 years ago when his transport was shot down over enemy territory. But if Bill had died in that crash, how was his handwriting in these files? Files that documented repair work done on enemy warships, years after his supposed death? Jake's mind raced. The cursed garage. Ships that ended up destroyed. Enemy vessels serviced here during the war. His hands weren't trembling from fear anymore. They were trembling with understanding. Jake didn't sleep much those first 3 days. He couldn't. Every file he opened revealed another piece of a puzzle that seemed impossible, yet the evidence was right there in front of him. The repair logs were encrypted, but not heavily. Bill had used an old Marine cipher, one that any mechanic from their unit would recognize. It was almost like he'd wanted someone from Earth to eventually find this. Jake worked through the night, his coffee going cold as he translated page after page of technical notes. The first file he cracked completely changed everything. KS Dominator. The cruiser that had devastated New Texas. According to the official record, it had suffered a catastrophic engine failure 3 weeks after that attack, breaking apart during a routine jump to hyperspace. 1,700 crew members lost. The Krenoid Empire had blamed it on human saboteurs planting a bomb, but they'd never found proof. Bill's notes told the real story. He'd serviced that ship's engine core. The repair looked perfect on the surface. New coolant lines replaced power couplings, upgraded safety systems. But buried in the technical specifications were tiny modifications. A coolant line routed just slightly wrong. A pressure valve calibrated to fail under sustained hyperspace stress. Changes so subtle that even a trained engineer would miss them on inspection. The ship hadn't been bombed. It had been murdered slowly, set up to destroy itself at the worst possible moment. Jake felt sick and impressed at the same time. This wasn't random sabotage. This was art. Deadly, calculated art. He pulled another file. DS Retribution. Battle reports showed it had lost main power during a fight with human destroyers near Europa Station. Dead in space, it had been torn apart by railgun fire. 2,000 enemy casualties. Bill's notes showed he'd worked on its primary power distribution system. Again, everything looked pristine in the official logs. But the hidden notes revealed the truth. A feedback loop programmed into the ship's computer, designed to cascade through the entire power grid under combat stress. The moment the ship's weapons heated up from sustained firing, the whole system would crash. File after file revealed the same pattern. Destroyers that exploded. Carriers that lost navigation. Frigates whose weapons overheated and cooked their own crews. Every single one had passed through this garage. Every single one had Bill Hayes' invisible fingerprints on it. Jake pulled up historical battle data from the war archives, cross-referencing ship names with engagement reports. The pattern was staggering. He created a timeline on his data pad, marking each sabotage and its result. The destroyer that exploded during the Battle of New Texas had been serviced here 14 days before it went critical. A troop transport that crashed during atmospheric entry, killing 300 soldiers. It had received upgraded navigation systems at this garage 1 month prior. A command carrier that suffered total systems failure during the siege of Mars, leaving an entire fleet without coordination. Bill had personally overhauled its computer core 6 weeks before the battle. Jake counted them up. Over 3 years of the war, 37 enemy vessels had come through this garage. 37 vessels had later suffered catastrophic failures. The combined casualties ran into the thousands. Maybe tens of thousands when you counted the battles those ships never made it to, the attacks they never launched. One man. One garage. Fighting an entire war from behind enemy lines. Jake leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. The dock workers had called this place cursed. They were right in a way. Just not the way they thought. This wasn't supernatural bad luck. This was one angry marine mechanic turning every repair job into an act of revenge. But something else nagged at Jake's mind. He started checking the dates more carefully. Most of the sabotage jobs clustered during the main war years. The 3 bloodiest years of the conflict when the Krenoid Empire pushed deepest into human space. Then there was a gap. 10 years of nothing. The garage appeared to have sat empty. Then the files picked up again. Sporadic entries. Different ships, civilian and military mixed together. The handwriting was the same but shakier. Older. Jake's pulse quickened as he opened the most recent file. The date stamp made him freeze. 5 years ago. Just 5 years. Long after the war ended. Long after Bill Hayes should have gone home, retired, lived out his days in peace. The entry was brief. A small cargo hauler, registered to a trading company Jake didn't recognize. Standard maintenance. Nothing special in the official notes. But in the margins, in that familiar handwriting, Bill had written something different. Still here. Still watching. They haven't forgotten. Neither have I. Jake read it 3 times. Still here. Present tense. Bill wasn't reminiscing about the past. He was talking about 5 years ago. Which meant Bill Hayes might still be alive. Might still be out there, somewhere in this station or moving between stations, staying hidden. Jake stood up and walked to the office window. Outside, the docking bay sprawled out before him. Ships coming and going, aliens and humans moving cargo, the normal chaos of a frontier station. Somewhere out there, maybe watching this very garage, might be a 70-something-year-old mechanic who'd spent 30 years fighting a secret war. But if Bill was still alive and still hiding, that meant something else. It meant the people he'd been fighting were still looking for him. The Kreenoid Empire didn't forget. They especially didn't forget the people who'd cost them thousands of lives and dozens of warships. Jake looked at the files spread across the desk. His fresh start was turning into something much more complicated. He wasn't just running a garage anymore. He was standing in the middle of a battlefield that had never really ended. The war might be over, but someone was still fighting it. And now Jake was involved whether he wanted to be or not. Jake was under a transport's landing gear, checking the hydraulic lines when he heard boots on the garage floor. Multiple sets. Moving with purpose. He rolled out from under the ship and stood up, wiping grease from his hands. 3 aliens stood near the entrance, and they definitely weren't here for repairs. The lead one was tall, maybe 7 feet, with gray scales covering its skin. It wore what looked like an expensive suit, tailored to fit its broad frame. The other 2 were smaller but no less intimidating, one reptilian, one insectoid. Behind them stood 4 guards in tactical gear, hands resting on holstered weapons. This wasn't a friendly visit. The tall one approached Jake's counter with measured steps. It moved with the confidence of someone used to getting what they wanted. When it spoke, its voice came out in a low hiss, the translator implant struggling to keep up with the alien's natural speech patterns. "You are the new owner of this establishment," it stated rather than asked. "That's right," Jake replied, keeping his voice level. "Jake Rivers. What can I do for you?" The alien reached into its suit jacket with one clawed hand and pulled out a sleek briefcase. It placed it on the counter with a heavy thunk. The latches clicked open, revealing neat stacks of credit chips. More money than Jake had seen in years. "Close this establishment," the alien hissed. "Sell it back. We will compensate you generously for your trouble. Double what you paid, plus these credits for your inconvenience." Jake looked at the money, then back at the alien. "Not interested." The alien's eyes, 3 of them, arranged in a triangle on its face, narrowed into slits. "You misunderstand. This is not a negotiation. This property has historical significance. It should not be in operation." "I've got a license from Station Authority," Jake said. "Everything's legal. And I'm not selling." One of the guards shifted position, his hand moving closer to his weapon. Jake noticed but didn't react. He'd faced down worse than hired muscle in his Marine days. The tall alien leaned forward slightly, its breath smelling like sulfur. "Human, you are making a mistake. Accept our offer. Leave this station. Forget about this place. Or you will regret this decision." Jake met its gaze without flinching. "I think we're done here." For a long moment, nobody moved. Then the alien straightened up, closed the briefcase with a sharp snap, and turned away. "So be it," it said. The group left, their footsteps echoing through the garage. But as Jake watched them go, he noticed something. 2 of the guards didn't leave with the others. They took up positions in the plaza outside, one near a coffee vendor, another by a loading dock across the way. They were trying to look casual, but Jake recognized surveillance when he saw it. Within an hour, he spotted 2 more. Different species, different clothes, but same energy. They were watching the garage. Watching everyone who came near it. Jake locked up the front entrance and headed to his small office in the back. He pulled out his old military comm unit, a battered device he'd kept from his service days. It still had secure channels programmed in, connections to guys from his old unit who'd stayed in. He sent an encrypted message to Tom Patterson, a buddy who'd made sergeant and was still active duty on a fleet carrier. The message was brief: "Need intel. Attached location data. Who's interested in this place and why?" The reply took 6 hours. When it came through, it was heavily encrypted, military grade. Jake had to run it through 3 decryption cycles before it became readable. What he read made his blood run cold, then hot with anger. Hayes not Kia. Intel reports he was captured after transport crash. Kreenoid Empire held him as forced labor. Made him work on their ships. He escaped custody approximately 8 months after capture. Empire never announced this publicly, would have looked weak. He disappeared into the frontier stations. Stayed hidden for 3 decades. Jake read on, his jaw tightening. Recent intelligence suggests Empire's still hunting him. They want him for war crimes, that's what they call it. Really, they want revenge. He cost them billions and lost ships and material. Hundreds of high-ranking officers died because of his work. They've got a standing bounty on him, massive payout, no questions asked about methods. The message continued. Analysis suggests they think Hayes might return to that location. It was his base of operations. They're probably hoping you'll lead them to him, or that he'll show up to make contact with you. Be careful. These aren't government operatives, they're hired hunters. No rules of engagement. Tom had added a personal note at the end. Jake, get out of there. This isn't your fight. Sell the place and walk away. Jake stared at the screen for a long time. Outside, through the small office window, he could see the watchers still in position. They weren't even trying to hide anymore. They wanted him to know he was being monitored. Wanted him to feel the pressure. Bill Hayes was alive. Somewhere out there, an old Marine was still running, still hiding, still looking over his shoulder after 30 years. The man who'd taught Jake everything about being a mechanic. The man who'd saved his life twice during training exercises. The man who'd fought an entire war by himself from behind enemy lines. And now these aliens thought they could use Jake as bait to catch him. Jake closed the comm unit and stood up. He walked to the wall where he'd hung his old Marine service photo. His unit standing in front of a dropship, young and cocky and ready to take on the galaxy. Bill Hayes stood in the center, not smiling, but with that look in his eyes that said he'd walk through fire for any of his people. Jake made his decision. Tom was wrong. This was absolutely his fight. He pulled up the garage's computer system and started reviewing the security protocols. If these hunters wanted to watch him, fine. Let them watch. But they weren't the only ones who could play that game. Jake had spent 20 years keeping ships running in combat zones. He knew systems. He knew stations. And he knew how to fight dirty when he needed to. Time to go on offense. Jake had been searching the office for 2 days straight. He knew there had to be more. Bill wouldn't have left just those service records. There had to be something else, some kind of final message or instruction. He checked every drawer, every cabinet, every loose panel in the walls. Nothing. The office had given up all its obvious secrets. But Jake knew his old commanding officer. Bill never did anything obvious. It was the 3rd night when Jake noticed something odd about the floor. He dropped a wrench and instead of the solid thunk he expected, it made a slightly hollow sound. He got down on his hands and knees, tapping the floor tiles one by one. There. In the corner, under where the desk had been. A different sound. Jake pulled out his multi-tool and worked at the edges of the tile. It took 20 minutes of careful prying, but finally it came loose. Underneath was a small floor safe, the kind designed to survive fires and explosions. The lock was old-style mechanical, not electronic. Harder to hack, Bill would have said. The combination took Jake another hour to crack. He tried every significant date he could remember from their service together, commissioning dates, battle dates, even Bill's birthday. Nothing worked. Finally, on a hunch, he tried the date of the transport crash that had supposedly killed Bill. The safe clicked open. Inside was a single waterproof case, the kind used to protect sensitive equipment in harsh environments. Jake pulled it out carefully, his hands shaking slightly. The case was sealed tight, but the latch gave way easily enough. A data chip. That's all it was. One small piece of technology that could fit in the palm of his hand. Jake carried it to the office computer and slotted it in. The screen flickered, and then a video file began to play. Bill Hayes stared out from the screen and Jake's breath caught in his throat. The man looked older, much older, than Jake remembered. His hair had gone completely gray and deep lines creased his face. But the eyes were the same. Sure. Focused. Unbreakable. If you're hearing this, you found my life's work, Bill's voice came through the speakers. It sounded rough, like he'd been shouting or maybe just living rough for too long. Don't know who you are. Maybe you're one of my old Marines. Maybe you're just some poor fool who bought this place thinking you'd run a normal business. Bill leaned back in his chair. Jake recognized it as the same chair he was sitting in now. Either way, you need to know what happened here. What I did. Kid, I spent 30 years making them pay for what they did to our colonies. Every ship I touched, every system I fixed, I made sure it would fail when they needed it most. This garage was my weapon. Every day I came to work was another day I fought the war. Jake watched as Bill's expression hardened. But I saved the best for last. 3 years after the war officially ended, they came back. The Kreenoid Empire sent a delegation to this station for peace talks. Bunch of propaganda nonsense. They brought their biggest command carrier, the Devastator. Wanted to show off their power. They brought it here for servicing. And they let me work on it. Bill smiled, and it wasn't a pleasant expression. I rigged the fuel depot. While their fancy diplomats were making speeches about peace and cooperation, I was in the station's infrastructure, setting up the biggest sabotage job of my career. When that carrier tried to refuel for departure, the whole system went critical. The explosion took out their entire escort fleet. 17 ships gone in under 2 minutes. 4,000 of their best crew. Jake felt his stomach drop. He remembered that incident. It had been all over the news. The official story was that it was an accident, a terrible malfunction in aging station equipment. The Empire had screamed about sabotage but never found proof. The blast should have killed me, Bill continued. Almost did. Spent 3 months in a medical bay using a fake identity. But I survived. And I'm still out there, kid. Still fighting. They think the war is over. It's not over until I say it's over. Bill leaned forward, his eyes intense. But here's the thing. If they've come looking, if they've found this garage and put eyes on it, you need to protect yourself. I built insurance into everything. Protocol Grizzly. Remember that name. Jake grabbed a data pad and started taking notes. Every piece of alien tech I installed in that garage over the years, power generators, security systems, atmospheric processors, communications arrays, all of it has a backdoor. Code I wrote personally. The garage itself is the trigger. You access Protocol Grizzly through the main terminal, and it activates everything at once. Turns the whole place into a fortress. Or a trap, depending on what you need. Bill paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. I didn't just rig the garage, kid. I rigged the entire dock sector. Spent years doing side jobs, installing systems, making upgrades. Every alien ship that docks in bays 12 through 37 has to connect to infrastructure I modified. If you need to make a statement, Protocol Grizzly gives you control of all of it. Jake's eyes widened. He pulled up the station schematics on a second screen, overlaying the dock sector layout. Bill wasn't exaggerating. The modifications were everywhere, woven through the station's systems like a spider web. Use it if you have to, Bill said. But be smart about it. Make sure you're on the right side of station security when you do. And kid, whoever you are, thanks for listening to an old soldier's last message. Stay sharp. Stay alive. The video ended. Jake sat in silence for a long moment, processing everything. Outside he could see the watchers still in position. They'd gotten bolder over the past few days, moving closer, making their presence known. They were waiting for something. Waiting for Bill to show up, maybe? Or waiting for orders to move in and take Jake apart looking for information. Jake pulled up his encrypted comm unit and typed a message to Tom. Tell command, going loud. The reply came back almost immediately. What are you planning? Jake looked at the screen showing Protocol Grizzly's activation sequence. He looked at the schematics showing Bill's 30 years of careful preparation. He looked out the window at the mercenaries who thought they could intimidate him. Teaching some people why you don't mess with Marines, he typed back. Time to see what Bill had really built. Jake spent the evening preparing. He'd studied Protocol Grizzly's systems for hours, memorizing the activation sequence, understanding what would happen when he triggered it. The mercenaries outside had grown more aggressive throughout the day. More of them had arrived, he'd counted at least 12 now. They weren't even pretending to be casual observers anymore. They were waiting for nightfall. Jake locked the main doors and set up his workstation near the central control panel. He made coffee knowing it would be a long night. Part of him hoped they'd just give up and leave. But he knew better. These weren't the type to walk away from a payday. The clock on the wall ticked past 11. Then 11:30. Jake checked the external cameras Bill had installed throughout the garage. Nothing yet. At 11:50 the power flickered. Jake's hand moved to the control panel. They were cutting the external power feeds, trying to knock out his systems. What they didn't know was that Bill had installed independent backup generators years ago, hidden in the garage's foundation. The lights dimmed for only a second before the backups kicked in. Midnight came. The garage's side entrance exploded inward. Not literally, they used some kind of electronic override to blow the locks. Smart. Quieter than breaching charges, less likely to alert station security immediately. Jake watched on the cameras as the tactical team poured in. 12 mercenaries, fully armored, carrying plasma rifles that glowed with ready charges. They moved like professionals, covering angles, communicating with hand signals. The lead one pointed toward the office. They knew where Jake was. Jake took a breath and entered the activation code Bill had left him. For a moment, nothing happened. The mercenaries kept advancing, spreading through the garage, weapons raised. Then everything came alive at once. The power generators Jake had thought were simple backup units suddenly surged with output far beyond normal parameters. Energy crackled through systems that shouldn't have been connected. The garage's lights blazed brilliant white, so bright the mercenaries threw up their arms to shield their eyes. The modified cargo containers along the walls split open with hydraulic hisses. What emerged weren't storage racks or tools. They were turrets, automated defense systems built from salvaged ship weapons. But these weren't designed to fire. Instead, they emitted focused electromagnetic pulses. The first pulse wave hit the mercenaries like an invisible hammer. Their plasma rifles sparked and died. Their armor's powered systems shut down. Their communication gears squealed with feedback and went silent. In 3 seconds they went from a high-tech tactical unit to 12 confused aliens stumbling in heavy, unpowered armor. But Protocol Grizzly wasn't done. The walls themselves began to hum. Jake had thought the metal panels were just structural reinforcement. He'd been wrong. They were capacitors storing electrical charge. Now they activated, turning the garage's interior into a maze of electrified barriers. Not enough voltage to kill, Bill had been precise about that, but more than enough to deliver stunning shocks to anyone who touched them. One mercenary backed into a wall and went down twitching. Another tried to reach for a side door and got thrown backward by the charge. They were trapped, their equipment dead, surrounded by systems that had transformed from innocent garage equipment into a web of defensive weapons. The turrets shifted, tracking movement. They began emitting a high-frequency sound that made the aliens clutch their heads. Different species, different hearing ranges. Bill had figured out how to target all of them at once. The mercenaries broke. They ran for the blown entrance, stumbling over each other in their panic to escape. Jake watched them flee into the plaza outside, leaving behind their useless weapons and sparking equipment. He pressed another key, shutting down the defensive systems. The garage fell quiet again, just the hum of normal power and the smell of ozone in the air. Jake heard sirens approaching. Station security finally responding to the disturbance. He pulled up his documentation, the legal licenses for the garage, the records showing he'd been attacked, the security footage capturing everything. He'd be fine with the authorities. He walked outside as the security teams arrived, their vehicles lighting up the plaza. A crowd had gathered, station residents drawn by the commotion, aliens and humans alike watching the mercenaries being rounded up for questioning. Jake scanned the crowd, his eyes moving from face to face. Then he saw him. An older human man stood near the back, half hidden behind a group of tall aliens. Gray beard, face marked with scars, but standing with a posture Jake recognized immediately. Military bearing. The kind you never lose no matter how many years pass. Their eyes met across the distance. The old man's face remained neutral, but something flickered in his eyes. Recognition maybe. Or approval. He gave one small nod, the kind of acknowledgement one Marine gives another. Then he turned and disappeared into the crowd, moving with surprising speed for someone his age. Jake started to follow but stopped himself. Bill didn't want to be found. Not yet. Maybe not ever. The security chief approached, asking questions. Jake answered on autopilot, his mind still on that gray-bearded figure vanishing into the station's depths. Hours later, after the authorities had finished their investigation and ruled the incident a clear case of self-defense, Jake finally returned to his garage. The sun was coming up, or what passed for sunrise on a space station. He found it on the counter near the main entrance. A small piece of paper folded once. His heart hammered as he picked it up. The handwriting was familiar. Shaky with age but unmistakable. Good work, Marine. Keep the doors open. We're not done yet. Bish. Jake read it 3 times, then carefully folded it and put it in his pocket. He looked around the garage, this place that had been a weapon for 30 years, this place where one man had fought his own war. He walked to the main lift and fired it up. The hydraulics groaned to life, raising a repair platform into position. The war was officially over. Had been for decades. The peace treaties were signed, the borders established, the reparations paid. But standing in that garage holding Bill's note, Jake understood something. Peace was just a word on paper. Real peace. The kind that meant people were safe, the kind that meant the people who'd hurt humanity faced consequences. That took work. Constant work. The resistance hadn't ended. It had just changed forms. Jake smiled and got to work. He had a garage to run. And he wasn't running it alone.